That's why we're very much grateful also to the French Embassy for this opportunity to work with us on this topic, and also to provide some inputs and hear the perspectives of the French side, especially given that currently France is holding the EU presidency, and this is one of the priorities we're all working on. That's why with us today we have a perfect setup of speakers. We have Felix Boutze, who is a member of the Center for Analysis, Forecasting and Strategy of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, France. We have Pierre Garoche, who is Research Fellow in European Security at the Institute for Strategic Research, coming also from France. We have Lucia, who is Acting Editor-in-Chief at Euroactiv, Slovakia. And we also have General Pavel Masko, former Deputy Chief of General Staff of the Slovak Armed Forces, who was also the high-ranking Slovak in NATO structures, also joining us here and coming from Slovakia as well. My name is Alina Kucko. I'm Vice President of GlobSec and Director of the GlobSec Policy Institute. What we're going to do today is that we're going to have a round of introductory remarks by the speakers, and then we hope to engage into the conversation. So please feel free to start thinking about your points, your comments, but also the questions which you would like to address in the conversation. For those who are joining us on Zoom, a couple of the ground rules: please try to keep your camera off and your sound off if you're not speaking. Please raise your hand if you would like to jump into the conversation. We'll be monitoring the Zoom setup also, and we'll bring you in when you would like to speak. But also you have an opportunity to post questions on chat. We'll be picking them up. Our live audiences also can pose the questions on the Facebook or YouTube or Twitter live stream, and we'll try to bring in those questions as well. So this is it for the introduction and the house rules. And for starters, I would like the speakers to reflect on the very concept of the strategic partners, where we are right now, whether it's relevant, how relevant it is, what could be means if Europe is serious about European defense and its contributions, and how it all relates to the current security environment where we are right now. And first, we're going to go to Felix Boutze for future remarks.
Thank you, Alina, and good morning to everybody. We just had a couple of remarks. I think you want to be short. And, as this meeting was planned before the Russian war against Ukraine is beginning, I will really try to emphasize still the differences and what has changed since February 21st. I think that three things have changed basically. First, Russia has been very clear in violating deliberately a number of principles to which it committed that are the foundations of our security order in Europe, but also principles that are defining the multilateral order in which we Europeans we do live. And the basic conclusion that we have to face that question, and that country has now neighborhood and knows that it is acting in a destabilizing manner, not only on the east of the continent, but as we saw on the southeast in Syria or in the south in the south. So this is the first thing. Second thing, I think that this war since February 24th has prompted a shock in the public opinion worldwide, but also a shock domestically in the European Union, and it has triggered what I would say a kind of strategic awakening of European Union member states. And when we look at what is happening, especially in Germany, but also the doors that are being possibly opened in Denmark, the reflections about the defense effort that is taking place possibly in this very country, but also in Belgium, the questions that are raised in Finland and Sweden, we see that European Union member states do not have any longer the luxury of being bound by, let's say, a traditional posture. And it is very important because, of course, these national efforts will build what is being done at EU level, and they are parts of our efforts to rearm, not only with forces and capabilities, but also, I would say, to intellectually rearm and foster a strategic culture that we think is very important. Third element of change, the EU has acted not only with words and communique, but with real actions, with a whole range of instruments at its disposal, not only these very heavy sanctions, but also the first use of this European peace facility that was defined and designed only a few months ago, and maybe thinking of other contexts than Ukraine. So this is very important. So the EU has acted. It has acted swiftly, not in matters of weeks, like in 2014, not in matters of months with the COVID, or in matter of years with the financial crisis. It has acted in matter of hours, if not days. And finally, the EU has been very united. And I think that it's very important that it has deceived somehow the Russian expectations on our fragmentation and our divisions. It has acted in a united fashion, not only amongst the EU and its member states, but also in close coordination with our partners, with NATO, with the United States, and interestingly also, it has been a case where we have seen a kind of rapprochement with the United Kingdom. So now the question is, what can we do out of these three changes? The question is how we make sure that we take into account this new reality of Russia, and also that we build upon these two important elements of strategic awakening and renewal or new impetus within the EU. And so for that, we have to put that in a medium and long-term perspective. It was the purpose of the recent informal summit in Versailles. It will be the topic of the upcoming European Council in 10 days' time. And for that, we have, I think we all agree now, after all the debates about how you call it, strategic autonomy, open strategic autonomy, European sovereignty, strategic sovereignty, whatever. We have a kind of consensus that it's important to make the EU in a position to assess, to decide, and to act with partners wherever possible, and on its own whenever necessary. And for that, of course, I think that there is it's the purpose also of the strategic compass to have a kind of integration of instruments over the whole spectrum. I think that what is at stake is, of course, to make these efforts live in the long run. One of the two elements I see, and the questions we will have to reflect on, is the capability development aspect. The fact is that we need to fill the critical shortfall that had been identified for years. We must make sure that if we are together starting to spend more on defense, that we do that in a coordinated fashion and in a collaborative manner, which maximize somehow our output and the capabilities we have. That we do that in strong coordination with NATO, and I think it's important that it has been recognized, including by the US, that the strong EU capabilities do contribute to NATO and our overall security, and that we reinforce our industrial basis. And the second aspect is, of course, not only to cope with the current crisis and the war in Ukraine, but also that we prepare for the next crisis. And what we saw with the European Peace Facility is that you need some instruments that you can mobilize at very short notice. And in that respect, I think it's very important that that our efforts, including in the strategic compass, do focus also on these areas of tomorrow. As we mentioned, space, cyber, but also geographically, that we are very conscious of what is happening in Europe, but also elsewhere. And this has been the purpose of some efforts in the last couple of months around the Indo-Pacific. And I think that when you look at the Ukraine crisis, you cannot think of it only in a European continent order on.
Thank you so much, Felix. A lot of important things there that we'll pick up upon, but thank you also for highlighting that indeed a strong interaction is now, we need to be prepared for future crises. The current war is unlikely to stop in Ukraine and unlikely to be the last moment of confrontation in Europe. So thank you so much for that. And this discussion is very interesting because we have on the one hand had a very strong French perspective, and the French have been taking the leadership role in trying to direct Europe towards a much stronger defense and security. On the other hand, we have Central Europeans, and a lot of Central Europeans would say that what Felix has mentioned now, strategic awakening, this we have been strategically awakened for a long time. So with that, I would like to go to General Maskov for his perspectives.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation to this August family. I would like to go along 3 lines where we are now, what we have to do, and as former retired military general also to say what military capabilities we should aim to. So where we are in completely different world. I would fully agree with my colleague, previous speaker. What we have feared in terms of what is possible, but mentally not accepted and undervalued, became reality. Policy of appeasement and economical interdependence with Russia, which we believe could stop them and bring us closer to cooperation, didn't actually stop Mr. Putin, didn't deter him, and he decided to go to vast military aggression in Europe against a relatively big country, but it's not a small European country. So we see major war on the European continent. We see also that there is no substitute for NATO at the time, and I don't see it coming anytime soon. Yet, Europe must make its choices and start aggressively building its defense and security capacity. Although war strategic preconditions and global trends would dictate or would suggest that there should be the global, at least cooperation between Russia and Europe, we see the opposite, and it's not going to change. Simply, the Russian regime sees us as weak and tries to change the balance, global balance by force. Thanks God, it's not as effective as we would fear before the attack. Yet Russia has huge military potential, has ambition, and actually maneuvered itself to a very uncomfortable situation from which it's hard to see any reasonable outcome in a short-term view. So we will be in the world where this global power competence is turning actually to conflict, at least with Russia, but we see also on the sidelines other players who are watching what is going to happen, and if they are reserved at the moment, it doesn't mean that it will stay as it is. Russia, and this is the Central European perspective, fought a war against us many years. Just they declared us as enemy in their documents, in their doctrines. We just underestimated it. We just took it as a rhetoric, as something which is pro domo in the Russian system. But now we see, as you said, that SS decided and act. Russia assessed that it could act, decided, and it's active. This might happen in the future as well, although it will be difficult for them to recover from the current conflict. So we were to some extent strategically blind, but as it was said, we are awakening, we see the things, but we have to also do our own part of assessment, what the situation is regarding how the war on Ukraine and aggression on Ukraine will actually close or finish. So what we have to do, we have strategic compass, but the situation has changed so dramatically that actually what is good in it is the structure. subscribe for the structure, but actually we have to go inside and to the content. And actually, everything what is there could be kept, but it has to be given completely different context. It has to be given completely different level of ambition. So we have to overhaul it. But in order to do so, and it has already started inside the European Union, it has started in NATO, we have to do profound political strategic and military strategic assessment of the situation and see what should be the consequences and measures from our side from the short-term, mid-term, and long-term perspective. This is really not a shower or summer storm. What we see is a dramatic security climate change, and it will stay here for decades. It may be moderated, and that's why we have to do something in order to moderate it, but we are in a different world after 22nd of February. First, we should conduct, as I said, these political, strategic, and military strategic assessments. And second, we should devise one consolidated and true strategy. Plus, for European Union, we are now talking about European Union, and really in terms of ends, ways, and means. As we should do it doctrinally, we should define our ends, ways, and means, and we should go alongside the major pillars of our power if we want to have European Union as a power which is able to influence, not only defend itself, to pursue its interests, but also act on pursuing our interests. So we should go alongside the political line, alongside the intelligence information in these areas, military but also economical. And it has a lot of outlets like our dependence on energy policy, other things, but we should do it really in very short time, and we should aim on the strategic ends, ways how to get there, and means how to achieve them. Simply, we will have to change the way we do business. Something was mentioned at the last moment. We were able to come together. The ultimatum from Mr. Putin and his regime on 15th of December was a awakening point where we have seen, okay, he has maybe wrong set, but he has a grand strategy, and that grand strategy was completely different arrangements. Europe, which is not in our favor. So, what we should do in terms of military capabilities, we can go back in the discussion about European army, many things, but in reality, at the moment, without NATO, we cannot move anywhere in reasonable fashion. We have a lot of tools, we have some equipment, we have a lot of plans, but what we need to do in very organized manner and come together, we have to have capability to command. It has to be some permanent European headquarters. We will have to create more robust and agile operational headquarters, which are able to come together very quickly, and if nothing else, at least at the beginning, at the early stage or early warning, when we see that something is developing, to conduct not only prudent military planning and prudent political assessment, but also try to plan real action in case things are developing the wrong way. Second, we have to have a look at the fourth generation process and common capabilities. It's clear that we have some capability gaps. We have PESCO, we have CAR, but actually do they fit to real development of our collective ability to react, also in terms of hard power, at least presenting it, and if necessary, also use it. Because we see now Russia, fortunately for Ukrainians, at the moment has a problem in using the power, but they are eager to present it and they are able to use it. We will have to address capability gaps and critical capabilities in Europe, regardless of how complementary or independently we want to act with NATO. Simply, we have gaps in some major capabilities, and we have also the posture of force on our territory very uneven. And actually, despite the Russian rhetoric, we are in an opposite situation. The whole eastern flank of NATO is more demilitarized than posing the threat to Russians as they claim. So it is the opposite. We will have to rebalance a little bit or make measures which allow us to quickly move from one side of the continent to the other one. Because there might be in the future, and that's described also here in the compass, there might be some other challenges that will have to be acted on all possible directions. We should have discussion on readiness posture. Our readiness schemes are 180 days. Majority of European forces in 180 days readiness. 30 days we call high readiness force, and very high readiness force we call those in NATO, those 5 days, which is also European battlefield, but that's for out of area operations, but really doesn't have substantial force in order to act in situation like this. Given the present, these are resolved, we will take measures in case which we are threatened further. So we will have to have a look on readiness posture of our forces, on structure, obviously, assess the capabilities for the future, what should be the setup. But this readiness will cost a lot. It will be extremely expensive. 120 days, we are 22nd day, if I count correctly, in a war. So many things have changed already within the first 3 days. Simply these readiness postures are saying also to our opponents what is our flexibility to act. And our flexibility to act is more in economic or diplomatic area, but militarily we are not so flexible to act in case threat would continue in our direction.
Excuse me. I have not to ask. So what kind of time frame are you talking about?
Well, this is to be assessed. This should be, I don't want to read a crystal ball. We should have really a look on what is our aim, what level of flexibility, and what is our level of ambition in terms also of European defense and security. And based on that, we have to adjust also the measures. We should have this fourth generation set up and system of cascading the forces, putting them together. That means very high readiness force, but that group is too small. Deterrent force. This is just I leave it in open. We have to think about whether we should go the way to acquire deterrence force, or we have some of it. It's in national hands at the moment, or very limited access to our collective use. But we should have this discussion. But this is not so urgent at the moment. At the moment, the previous points are. So we should focus on. Thank you. At the moment, I will stop here.
Thank you so much, General, for outlining actually a very specific way forward and highlighting that the level of ambition in a way is already increasing at the national level. A lot of countries doing what was unimaginable even a couple of weeks ago. So we'll now switch back to the French side, and I want to bring in Pierre Laroche now for his remarks.
Thank you very much for organizing the event. I want to add 3 things. First, I want to underline the fact that it's already quite extraordinary the role that the European Union has managed to have in this crisis. You have to remember that in the initial steps of the crisis back in December 21, the question was, will the European Union be involved in some way in discussion? I remember that Josep Borrell, the High Representative, stated that things shouldn't be discussed over our heads. Okay, and of course, for Russians, the European Union is not necessarily seen as a very relevant or respectable interlocutor. This is something we already witnessed when the High Representative again went to Moscow in 2021 and was humiliated. Russia announced it decided to expel European diplomats at the same time, and so on. So the European Union is not taken seriously by Russia, was not directly involved in the early steps. Russia, obviously, as a great power, wanted to talk directly to the other giant, the United States, not or perhaps to some big member states, but not the European Union. And then,
just very sorry to interrupt, but I'm just told that the Zoom participants are not having very good sound, so if the
Okay.
speakers don't mind taking off the mask
Okay.
and speaking, that would be good.
No problem. Yeah, the microphone is here. So the European Union was not taken seriously by Russia. And then because of its reaction, and I won't come back to what was already said about it, but the fact that it was cohesive and stronger than what Russians, but actually, to be honest, to what Europeans would have expected, changed the situation, and the European Union, in a way, emerged. And I think the main point is not so much the strength of the sanctions, because yes, the sanctions are strong, but this is something that we expected, that we would come with the sanctions. The most interesting thing is, I think, the use of the European peace facility. We have to remember that a few years ago, the very idea that the European Union could provide lethal equipment to a third party was very controversial. The European peace facility was negotiated for a long time. It was not consensual. I can remember the time a few years ago when, in the framework of the European Union training mission in Central Africa, the debate was whether or not the European Union could provide computers to the Central African army to manage their human resource. And the legal answer was no, because it's a military tool and the objective is military. And now, not only do we have this instrument, but even those member states who are very reluctant about the use of this instrument for lethal equipment now agree that it should be used for lethal equipment. And the amount of money is substantial. Now it's €1 billion, and many countries want to directly contribute with important military equipment. So that's already an illustration of the fact that things that were impossible, very controversial a few years ago, a few months ago, are now possible. So it means that this crisis certainly is a litmus test for the European Union, because we have to show that it is relevant, but in a way, it is also a window of opportunity because of this situation in which people tend to agree that something should be done, and perceptions tend to align relatively. I'm thinking of an example a few days ago, I read an opinion poll in Spain showing that between January and March 22, the level of people who believe that Russia is a major threat boomed. And it was like a minor threat at the beginning of the year, and now for most Spanish people, I think it's the #1 threat for the country. So it tends to align. It creates the convergence of perception also, and we have to react at the level of this situation. We have to remember also that already in 2014, after the previous Ukrainian crisis, the European Union reacted and put some instruments on the table, and I think it was the very origin of the reflection that eventually led to the European Defence Fund. It was very important, in particular, for the European Commission to show that it was able to contribute with its own instruments to this new strategic environment. And of course, the European Defence Fund is a very important instrument, but with its own limits, because it funds research, development, basically military prototypes, but doesn't go further. And I think that today, with this new crisis that goes much further, the level of ambition, as we said, should be adapted. And I think it is the time for us to think about the possibility of going further than just research and development. And it would make sense because this is the logic of the European Defence Fund. The logic has always been to finance first research, development, in order to facilitate joint procurement and perhaps even mutualization of equipment and interoperability and so on. So to facilitate military cooperation at the end. There are some legal obstacles, in particular Article 41.2 that ban the use of the European Union budget for military operations. But I think today, because of this situation, also because that it would be ridiculous, I think, to provide weapons to the Ukrainian army, but to say that the European Union is not able to provide weapons to its own member states, we should think about opening legal possibility to go further. And I think there is an option that would not necessitate a new intergovernmental conference, treaty amendment, and so on. This is Article 42.2, which says that the European Council can decide to declare a new situation in which there is a common defense. It will go a next step. It will go to a next step and declare that now we have a common defense by unanimity in the European Council. It can be ratified by member states according to their constitution, but it's not a treaty amendment. It's very true. It's not the same level. It's on a legal point of view. And based on this statement that we now have a common defense, the European Council could create exceptions to existing treaty provisions. And for instance, say that the European Union should be able to finance military equipment for its own member states. And I think it would be interesting because it could give a very interesting role for the European Union that would be fully complementary with that of NATO, because NATO, well, it has certain equipment, but it doesn't have a budget such as the budget of the European Union, and it would not interact with NATO's operational role in territorial defense, and it would have many advantages for member states because it would allow the mutualization of certain spending. And an example, I think, a first illustration of what we could do jointly with European funding is, for instance, funding military infrastructure, in particular in the frontline countries. It would contribute to deterrence because it would allow, it would facilitate the positioning of troops in the region. The European Union could also, for instance, finance logistic stocks. We saw in this conflict that logistics is certainly a very crucial question if you want to be serious about your capabilities. So I know ammunition could be bought by the European Union and stocked in certain strategic points to facilitate the positioning of European troops and in case of crisis to facilitate the strengthening of our posture. And I would also connect with some ideas that were already mentioned by Felix, the fact that we should not forget to think globally, because we have in front of us great powers that are not local powers. Certainly the war is localized, but the competition is certainly not localized. Russia is also playing in the Mediterranean and Africa. There is a connection with China. So perhaps this kind of model of mutualized logistic hubs or military base could also be replicated in other regions. I'm thinking about, for instance, the Indian Ocean. There are many Europeans that are present, for instance, in Dubai. There is a French base, a German base, an Italian base. The German have already spent some time in the French base, for instance, and it could be also replicated in some way. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much here, also for picking up on the legal issue. That's both the weak point and also the strong point of the European Union. We were talking about the defense case, but also what we see from the EU Commission. They already did a lot of acrobatics in how to make sure that legally everything is possible that we thought before wasn't possible. So I do and agree with you that there is a way to find way out also of the current country. But for that, I want to go next to Lucia for her perspective.
Thank you so much for the invitation and also to colleagues for giving very valuable points, which I think all of us will definitely reflect upon also later on. I would like to talk very much about the strategic concept and compass within the context of changing the war and how the process, the content, and how the implementation, these 3 points are somehow evolving within basically the last month. So we know that the process of creating the strategic compass has been going on for over a year, and recently we see that even though something has been agreed in November, we saw some preliminary versions of the document. We see and we know now that because of the war in Ukraine, a lot of elements are changing, which already somehow shows that the strategy that we had and we discussed for over a year wasn't really a bulletproof. This is really as it is. It has been changing, but now still a couple of days, in a couple of days, if we keep on with the same schedule as we are, in a couple of days we're supposed to agree on a couple of very important points here. Obviously the placement, or how are we going to name Russia, how are we going to name China, how are we going to name Turkey. This still are the points of the discussion at the highest level, which seems that we still are not as united as we may think. And outside we need to, but inside we know that these discussions are still ongoing. It is also very much important because again, regarding the process that we are preparing the strategic compass is at the same time going on with the process of a strategic concept of NATO, which I'm not going to talk about the opportunities, and we all read about it and heard about it, but exactly this reflection of how what kind of posture we will have towards Russia, China, even Turkey, for instance, as a NATO member. These are important points still to be discussed, and as these both strategies need to kind of reflect on each other and see how important it is, this will be a huge challenge to overcome. And we, again, I'm repeating, we only have a couple of days to go through this. And it brings me, the topic of NATO brings me to my second point, which is the content. We also know that within the original proposal, the NATO had a special place in the strategy regarding the connections to the partners, etc. What we are seeing now is that NATO as a partner is going to be placed most probably in much more areas, in much more topics and structures within the compass, which is obviously a good thing. But I'm not very sure whether this is going to happen, but it is still clear that NATO is the one to take over the territorial defense, and that the European Union within the document shall specify, as the General said, the capabilities of land and how we are going to develop them, strengthen the crisis management, resilience, development of other capabilities, etc. So this is the content that is changing at this point. And secondly, Wojciech very nicely commented on that in your paper, that the compass seems to be very much reactive instead of proactive. And I mentioned, we see that it is already changing. We see that there is a war I am hoping that the compass will be much more proactive in the sense that if we agree on it in March and in April we see that Chinese are suddenly starting to deliver arms to Russians, are we going to change the strategy again? This is supposed to be the main document for the EU. How can we have such shortcomings? And it's not only about China, it's about India, and it's also internally. We see that in Denmark, in 1st of June, we will have referendum. Denmark may be joining the European structures for defense. Are we ready to get them in, place them into PESCO project, etc.? So this kind of a strategy and bulletproof strategy obviously is not going to be bulletproof to everything, but we need to be prepared in that way. The complexity of the content is also very much appreciated. We see the modern warfare is not just territorial defense, which we have NATO for, but there are other elements Felix mentioned, cyber, hybrid, space, even though in maybe less smaller size, but that complexity again is a positive thing, but needs to be executed properly. Strategy probably will not give us certain ways how to do it, but still these need to be thought about. And again, this leads me to my third point, which is regarding the implementation. We mentioned, probably we will talk about tools. General Matko already named a couple that are needed, that we are discussing. All of the tools, all of the centers, all of the incentives that the European Union is giving and presenting within the compass is for the member states to implement. It's not the EU. EU can create some environment, but the European states, the EU member states, are going to be the ones to spend all those money, to spend it efficiently and very well. The spending of money, this is an important point, is maybe in a good way, in quality way, but for instance, countries such as Slovakia and some other Central European countries, we already know that spending European money for large projects don't need to be necessarily efficient right away and at the point. So there is a challenge whether all the money that we are putting are going to be spent, and whether they are going to be spent evenly, whether we are going to see huge military projects by bigger countries, obviously, to be much more involved, and then the money concentrated over there. So this is one point of the implementation, and the second point of the implementation is that currently we do not see that many comprehensive incentives within the compass. What I mean with that, in the defense package that European Commission presented just 2-3 weeks ago, which was some kind of European Commission's chip the discussion, how they chipped in, we hear about the possibilities of remission of taxes, VAT, for the purchase of jointly developed equipment of the EU. So if the EU develops some things together, some of the countries, VAT may be somehow postponed, remission, and so on. This seems to be very concrete thing to do, but this is part of the defense package. This is not part of any kind of incentive that the compass would be giving. And secondly, I do not see many discussions in taking it a step further and making it really a European implementation in sense of buying European. We see Slovakia, Germany, other countries are going to be spending much more money, obviously, for their military capabilities, for the system, and so on. However, all those money will be very fastly spent in a way that may not be that strategic, that we want strategic compass to give us the way. I mean, the buying European is not any element or a priority when it comes to acquisitions. We do not see it in Slovakia, we do not see that discussions to happen in any European level. So kind of push that the European European technology may be put forward when it comes to buying some systems. There are no such incentives and there are no such discussions. So if we really want to have strategic document which will discuss the strategic autonomy, which French are very much pushing for, this is also an element to keep it European. Yes, obviously there are challenges, not all the products are the best at the time available and so on, but just the logic behind it is somehow missing in my way. And just to wrap it up, all of that and all this discussion that we have is going to last very few days. We really are supposed to deliver and read the final strategic compass in really a couple of days. And all of these changes are being discussed pretty much by the same people that are currently discussing sanctions, that are currently discussing all kinds of options that the European Union has at the defense level. And at the same time, we are discussing that at the table regarding the strategic compass. So my final point is that we know that this is a very much of a French initiation to bring it at time, to bring it into March, due to internal political developments, let's call it. So as this French push is being present there, and we are kind of pushing, also probably other countries are pushing for having that document right away, as it's supposed to be bulletproof and last for 10 years and so on, etc. How can we do that in such a short time? And whether we are not going to kind of jeopardize the whole process, bringing something that's not going to be that of that good quality at the end of the day, just in order to save time, to have it on a proper day. And also, the very last thing, I do not know of any organization, entity, or the state that would be creating their own strategic document that's supposed to last for a decade in the middle of the war. So my suggestion would be take it easy, maybe push it if possible for a little further discussions for later on the publishing of the strategic compass.
Thank you so much, Luce. I'll start bringing people into conversation, so please indicate to me if you would like to speak. But right now, I feel like our French participants potentially might want to respond to Luce's latest suggestion, whether it makes sense to push for absolute adoption of the strategic concept right now, or all better off giving it a bit more time.
Well, I make jump in on that. I think it's important to realize that this strategic compass is a process that has been started during the German presidency, and that we decided to say to follow on and to take to fruition during the French presidency. I think what is at the core of the compass is not completely changed by the crisis. And I totally agree with what the general said about the importance of taking into account the context and also raising the level of ambition. As to the timing of the compass, I think it's very important that we also display some sense of, let's say, of resolve, that we are not deviating from our trajectory, even because of this war. I don't think that this war has proven that the compass, even in its previous version, was irrelevant. I think it has proven that it was relevant, and that we should put it further. And I think that as for any kind of European push, it is only a step in the process that is due to be pursued, including during the next presidency, I think that the idea in the compass is also to have some very clear schedule about and timings about tasks when should we advance on each and every topic. And I think it would not do us a favor just putting that kind of deadlines further. So that would be my answer. But indeed, it's let's say it's not, let's say, a document that will be
And I also want to bring in Ambassador Ledoux, who is joining us on Zoom. Ambassador, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Well, first of all, thank you very much to Globsec and the French Institute in Slovakia for organizing this very interesting and very timely debate. And I want to take the opportunity to thank all the speakers that were very interesting and made very relevant points. Of course, as a representative of France here in Slovakia, I cannot say anything else than that the conflict in Ukraine underlines the urgency for the European Union to be able to make decisions for herself and have the capacities to defend herself. It is a very evident thing for me. And then, of course, in this context, the strategic compass that is being discussed between the 27 member states is very relevant. It's very important to adopt it. And I cannot let you say, Madam, that we are rushing. The French presidency is rushing the debate on the strategic concept because of the presidential election. I cannot let you say that. I have to remind you, like the French speaker just remind you also, that this exercise has been started during the German presidency more than a year ago, and that there were intense consultations. Maybe you don't know about them, but there were intensive consultations between member states, between different institutions in Brussels. We have the third version of the text, so there were many discussions in different formats in Brussels. So it is not rushing. It is not rushing because of internal politics in France. I cannot let you say that. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador.
Yeah, just very shortly, Ambassador. Thank you for the comment. Obviously, I did not mean to impose on only that, and we were mentioning how long the process has been. And what I also would like to stress is that thanks to the French, and we all know very well know it, this discussion is being put forward, is incredibly necessary. And if it seems, and from my point of view, and from the discussions that I have and the things that I read, is that if French wouldn't do it, then probably nobody else would do it. So for that, the credit is obviously clear. Who has that to push forward? Obviously, I don't know how the discussions are ongoing behind. I know that they've been lasting and that there are a couple of versions. From the outside, this is just the impression that I'm getting, but full credit absolutely for the French initiative, because it seems for Holland here, it seems that if it wouldn't be, and if it also wouldn't be from the German initiation that you meant, we wouldn't be where we are at this point. We wouldn't have probably anything. So on that, maybe not to be misunderstood.
Thank you so much, Luce. And it's the job of the French team has not been easy, because it was already said many times before that the scenarios that we considered not so plausible before suddenly became not just rather plausible, but absolutely realistic. So definitely that was a hard work done to try to incorporate all the new probabilities into the new reality as well. And I want to go back first to General Martin for a few comments, and I see two people who want to jump in.
Just very quickly, I would like to go back to the point whether we should speed up preparation of strategy or postpone it. And here I would say my suggestion would be strategy. This is not operational plan, so we should do it as soon as possible because it should go in broad connotations, really stating our ends, ways and means, but not detailing everything. So it's not necessary to have very precise and long 200 pages text, rather to put forward clear strategy which would give our leaders orientation, what they should do. For example, we are talking about whether we should cut completely off ourselves from Russian oil and gas. Without strategy, you don't actually have orientation. What will then happen? What's the aim and how much you would like to sacrifice? So, just take an example from the history. During the World War II, American strategic view was after Pearl Harbor and discussion with the Allies, after the period of isolationism in the United States, to be said, the strategy was very simple. And it was said in one sentence: Germany first, Nazi Germany first, and then go after Japan. So, and that was completely changing the conduct of war. If you then look at the history and what has happened, because if they would focus different way, the war in Europe would last much longer probably. So we need to think really in strategic terms, and I fully agree with you, Lucia, that it should be long term. It cannot be something that we decide today and tomorrow something tactical will happen. I mean, on global stage tactical will happen, and then we would immediately start to redesign the strategy. It should be really like a beacon, showing us, okay, this is the direction we are going, and all the rest could be then adjusted. So from this point of view, I would advocate for rather sooner than later. So I would suggest and support the French viewpoint on this.
Thank you so much, General, also for the new challenge. Express it in one sentence. Not sure whether it's possible, but absolutely we need to work in this direction. And I want to bring in Tomasz Najden, chap, and
which order? This one. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. So I'm Tomasz Najden, work for the Deputy Minister of Defense of Slovakia. I have a question. I don't want to derail discussion in the direction of Russia, but I don't have a question on Russia. But before that, just one remark, echoing some of the sentiment that Lucia has been raising about the timing, the completion. The strategic compass is not the only document which is in the same position. You may look at the U.S. National Strategy, which is widely understood to be, if not completed, in a very advanced state of completion, and also the nuclear posture review, which is going to be derived from national security strategies, was actually expected to be presented already by now. And the nuclear posture review is as much as anticipated document as the strategic context, complex globally, I would say, especially now because of the nuclear ramifications that we see in this regard. This is just one sentence that I understand your way of thinking on this. But with regards to Russia, General, you mentioned, and this is a question to all of you if you want to jump in, you mentioned that Russia had a grand strategy. And this was just not like a thing that just happened out of nothing. It was widely thought through. But I would be curious to know how this grand strategy will change in Ukraine because of mainly three things. First, the performance of the military on the ground. Know way more about this than I do. It's probably a bit different than they expected. Second thing is the reaction of Europe, which I believe we can say is a bit different than they had expected. And also global condemnation, which is not as strong as in Europe, but Nobel Peace Prize laureates speak up. The International Criminal International Court of Justice has a clear opinion on what to do with the war. It sends a message. Russia is not completely isolated. We see that Chinese, Turkish counterparts, other nations, Indian, and so on and so on. But it probably does have an effect on how they think of the world. I would be curious to know, because we are pretty sure in Central Europe what we are going to do in the next 5 to 10 years. I would like to know what you think about how Russia is going to think about its goal in the next 5 to 10 years after this experience in the world.
Thank you so much, Tomasz. Maybe we can let a few people in and then combine the questions and answers. Andrei and Andrei.
Thank you very much, Andrei Matiszek, David Pravda. One remark about the timing of the strategic compass, if I may. Look, we can do it now. I don't see this. I am going to sound very cynical now, and apologies, but I'm journalist. We're quite cynical people. First, I have to admit that I think the great job was done on the compass, thanks to the German presidency, French presidency, all the consultation that was mentioned by Mr. Ambassador, I think we have a relatively okay document for the future. Of course, now influenced by the Russian war against Ukraine. On the other hand, and this is the cynical remark, we know how EU works. At one moment, the strategy compass will be referred in many other documents, and we will somehow implement it. But if we need to do things differently, we will forget about the compass. I think very quickly. So I think we will see this kind of a mix of yes, a little bit of beacon, but not all the time. If we need to be more flexible on things, but I might be wrong. I have to be proved wrong. We can maybe sit here in half a year or 1 year or 2 years and to talk about if I was wrong or I wasn't. I'm happy to put it on the table. And then my question, very interesting comments about the possible building this let's say military / defense structures also in the member states, maybe some logistical hubs. But basically 2 questions, and then it's first of all question for you, but anybody can jump in. How it will complement what NATO is doing now from your perspective? Because for example, now we are going to welcome, and Thomas may say more things about it, we are going to welcome the NATO Petra group here in Slovakia. Of course, we see the EFP structures in Baltics, and it will grow. It's clearly it will grow. So how those 2 initiatives, what NATO is doing now and trying to strengthen the eastern flank, might go along and might be complemented by your ideas you put on the table, these new infrastructures and again logistical things. So how, because I think it might be, should be very different from what NATO is doing, or how you can if you can explain it a bit more. And related questions, who pay for it? Do we need more? Do we need more? And this is also the question maybe for you, Paolo, because you said that it will cost money if we are going to build a higher readiness forces and so on. So do you think that we need a new resources in the EU for this, or for what we have is somehow okay? Don't forget that we are also in the middle of the another economic crisis, but we are not doing that great. We just went through pandemic, hopefully. I'm not sure that, to be honest. So let's see. So maybe you can touch upon those topics. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll take one more person and then bring it back to the speakers.
I have 2 questions on the issue of Dutch embassy, and well, now we're talking about the forward-looking approach, but so maybe going a bit back. If we look at the recent developments in Ukraine, how actually the European Union, how far can they go military-wise? Also taking the political context or context of possibilities and capabilities. And another question is connected more to, let's say, forward-looking approach again. We have seen that a number of steps that the European Union has adopted were really unprecedented. The approach towards the weapons. Of course, now we're talking about a situation which is, let's say, an immediate threat to European Union neighbouring country. But what does it mean, this maybe for future conflicts in, let's say, Africa, as an example, and also from the perspective as from, in a way, you as a global actor. How do you see this?
Thank you so much. A lot of questions, so I'll let everybody speak in the sitting order, starting from General Matsko. Please feel free to pick up on the questions you want to, but I'll make sure that all the questions are answered by one of the speakers.
Going back to the question about what is the outcome of Ukrainian war going to make this Russian grand strategy. So we should say what we have seen, this Russian grand strategy is failing. It's not done yet, but it's failing. So the grand strategy which we have seen is in declaration of 15th of December, or ultimatum, to say, was the expansion strategy. But at the moment, Russia failed militarily, is becoming weaker militarily, they failed economically, they are hit, and it's not yet accounted the cost of war, because that was already prerequisite, they have it already on the stocks, but it will soon come also to regular funding of conduct of war, but also they are to some extent diplomatically isolated and basically discredited. So what they will have to do, and there is one but in it, they will have to, if I were a Russian strategist, not Putin, I don't want to.
Please don't give them ideas.
But if I were a Russian strategist, I would now start to consider a change from expansion strategy, which really they wanted to gain their sphere of influence, you know, to have it up to German borders. This is gone. Unless something happens, I would go to survival strategy from viewpoint of Russian state, because they will be so overstretched as ever-growing empire, and with this failing strategy, actually, they might face severe challenges in order to survive as a stay with this level of ambition and everything. Have neighbors which have interest also in their resources and so on. It's not in terms of physical survival of state, which also may come into play, but really Russia will be in different situation and different posture. But it will depend on the outcome of Ukrainian campaign. If they are able, this other desperate moves of troops into the country and resources, they are able to crash the country down, they might still feel that they can somehow recover and will not go to the survival strategy, which could put us all to a very danger place, because they could be overreacting, as I said, economically, militarily, I mean in commercial military part, they have no capacity to pursue their original expansion strategy. But it may turn them to more desperate mode unless they see some way walking out and recover, because this is so serious hit for the state from strategic point of view that it will take them decades to recover and to regain the position they had. Very quick one on resources, whether we are going to put more or not, I don't want to steal your answer, but my view is a simple answer. Sitting here in Bratislava, we are in survival mode. We don't want to accept it, but the same we were saying before 24th of February, this is not going to happen, this is unlikely, this is irrational. No, simply we will have to invest to our defense and security in the worst possible time, because we have to recover from pandemic, from economic crisis, we have to do it. Now, we have to do it smartly, and that's why we are sitting here, that's why we need that compass, that's why we need to talk in broader audience together with NATO and so on, to spend, not to spend, that's last remark, to invest. We should not spend money, we should invest to our future. That's for me.
Thank you so much, General. Probably like you, I'm worried that the Russians won't think that the best defense is offense, especially the desperates. But that's a very good question. And we'll go to Pierre now.
Thank you very much. About the next Russian-Ukraine strategy, I don't know exactly, but I think survival or strategic autonomy could be a good concept for Russia, because, and this is also connected to the impact of Western sanctions. If sanctions last for a long time, the risk is that they do not represent an incentive or a sanction, but just create a new world, a new normal, in which in many areas like technology, internet, finance, trade, and so on, Western economies and Russian economy are disconnected. And it means that you have to adapt to this situation. So there is a possibility that the next strategy is a way to adapt to this situation, see interdependence as a critical risk, and try to
build to strengthen autonomy, possibly in partnership with China, so perhaps more dependent on China on the other hand. So in a way, strategic autonomy could be a more popular concept also as a consequence of sanctions, just as Chinese sanctions on European states also encouraged us to think about how to be prepared for these sanctions. We have a reflection at the European Union level on anti-coercion instruments and so on. That's exactly the same logic. About the complementarity of NATO, I think on certain areas it's just like the European Defence Fund. You can invest in military equipment that could be used nationally for the EU, for NATO. It's open. The European Defence Fund already states in its regulation that when planning planning the investments, NATO objectives and priorities should be taken into account. It could be exactly the same with this logic. It's just about investing jointly in needed capabilities. Whether these capabilities will eventually be used in small formats, in virtual formats, etc., that's a secondary question. Now, there is a more specific question if we're talking about infrastructure like military bases. I think there is still some room to take. I'm thinking, for instance, about what Germany did in the bases in its EFP bases. Germany invested nationally to strengthen the infrastructure there as a framework nation. This kind of investment, we could think that instead of one framework nation or one host nation invested isolatedly to develop a good infrastructure, this investment could be done jointly by the European Union for a base that could be used by NATO with a NATO multinational backed group, or used also in all of those institutional frameworks, just like weapons. It would not necessarily contradict or duplicate things that are done and well done within the NATO framework. I'm sorry, I don't understand exactly what was your question about the global level.
Well, no, one of the things is that now the EU has really responded in a very unprecedented way. And if, for example, this was Europe with Ukraine, with a traditional, not really a partner, but Russia, traditional risk. But if something similar happens to, say, Africa, will EU respond in a similar way? Was it something reference?
Yeah, I think an interesting point with this instrument, it is something that Felix already alluded to, that these instruments, sometimes we create them with a specific situation in mind, but eventually they are useful for different situations. Actually, CSDP was in this case. Initially, when CSDP was established, everybody thought about something like a new Kosovo crisis, in which the United States would not want to intervene. And that's why they had these ambitious plans with 60,000 troops involved and so on. And eventually it was useful, but for very different scenarios. And yes, I think, for instance, what we did with the European Peace Facility, for instance, it could prove useful to replicate this kind of action in other regions. We're talking about Africa, obviously, but perhaps also we are now in the process of engaging in the Indo-Pacific region. So acting in this region through cooperation with partners, capability building missions, capability building through the peace facility. Yeah, that could be useful. And also, as we said earlier, think that since the great powers we are facing think globally, and for them the world is the chessboard. For instance, we learned a few days ago that Russia tried to use the JCPOA as a leverage against the West and so on. So every region can be used to have a leverage on another region. So that's also how the EU should think about this crisis. Not just there is a disconnect between territorial defense and overseas crises, but everything is connected through great power competition. And now great power competition is really very structured at the World Bank.
Thank you so much, Pierre, and we're moving to Lucia.
Thank you. I will kind of pick up of what the General and also Pierre said. Regarding the Russian strategy, I think the map is pretty clear. Who is, for instance, voting at the UN for the kind of West and for the East, and who is abstaining and so on. And we know where the orange dots are standing, and this is probably the way where Russia can be moving. Probably this is the only way, and this is again somehow concentrated in the east of Asia, in the Indo-Pacific. So clearly, the region is going to be very important, even from the perspective of this current crisis. Regarding the global actor position of the European Union as being a global actor, I think we do see this revival or maybe emergence of the EU as a global actor, because, and I already wrote about it, we do see much more of the European leaders, even the EU leaders, Ursula von der Leyen Commission, Charles Michel, in the front row of all the discussions, and we do not see that much of, for instance, American leadership that we might have been used to in the past. So this is really giving the strength to the EU to play that great power games. And very last comment, because I think we are kind of running out of time, is regarding the resources, and I very much agree with what's been said before, how to elevate them. Obviously, the compass itself is talking about the efficiency, but as General said, the survival mode is so clear that there is no other place where to invest at this point than this. So whether we need to extend those funds, I think that there is a huge political will, and we see all around the European Union really extend those funds, and it's going to be very fast. Just not to make mistakes. This is what I'm always saying. Let's not haste it. Let's not put it in something that we're going to regret next year.
Thank you so much, Lucia.
I will make maybe three remarks on a very personal basis regarding Russia and its strategy. On a very personal basis, I wonder whether there is a strategy. You remember that in last summer, in June or July, I think, they released their so-called national security strategy, where it spoke about their assessment of the security environment, including the definition of, let's say, of the European Union and NATO as elements that were adversary to them. They spoke about the integration of means in a way that has not completely been displayed in the current war. But I just wonder whether there is something further than an opportunistic way and an opportunistic calculus that is seemingly wrong, because the Ukrainians are resisting, because the Europeans and the transatlantic community is united. I wonder whether there is currently a strategy, and it's a question for myself. Second, on the EU defense expenditures and the defense investment, I pretty much share the view that it's very important that we do what we can to incentivize the efforts of member states, and that we ensure that at EU level we can maximize what they are doing together. But I think we must be frank, including towards our public opinions, towards our parliament, that to make the EU be more than the sum of its parts, we should make sure that every individual member state is not thinking that the EU will somehow backfill the lack of investment of each individual member state. So it will be difficult. This will trigger some difficult discussions in parliament in each and every country, because everybody would prefer to spend more on education and on armed forces. But it is as it is. Third, on EU as a global actor, I think that this crisis reveals the fact that the EU is a relevant scale to act together, and is considered as such by other actors worldwide. And it's very important that in our mindset we do not, let's say, restrain ourselves to a vision which is restrained to resilience and to the absorption of external shocks. I think we need to be proactive. We need to be one of those that are shaping the rules to make sure that the world, we are also building a world where the EU and its citizens are well.
Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes officially left, so I would like to wrap it up with a question that we're picking up from social media. And that connects the question of the public perception of what's going on, public support to what the governments are trying to do to boost resilience and improve the security and safety. But it also goes back to this conversation about thinking about impossible and the scenarios that we would have considered impossible some time ago. And the question is, how do you assess the probability of war in Europe and in the NATO countries, European Union? Be it because Europe will have to be involved directly militarily by sending troops to Ukraine, or because there is going to be some military action also on the territory of the European Union. I will probably start in the reverse order that we had right now. So Felix, I'll go back to you first. And since we're running out of time, if you could give us quick answers, if that's possible, that would be appreciated.
We must make sure that everybody could make a calculus where it would be somehow possible or interesting to have such a possibility.
Thank you. Lucian?
Yeah, I'm also not coming up with a quick answer, and obviously that's a really large question, right? Like Europe will be active, and it seems that we are willing, and everybody is really hands-on on every single issue. At the very first day, we've seen and observed, and we've heard it maybe first, second, third day that, okay, where is the European Union? Are there going to be sanctions? Is it going to take as long as in 2014? Is it going to be that efficient or that efficient in the bracket? But European Union proved that if there is a crisis, if there's a major crisis, and if there is a political will, because crisis creates a political will, then it can act even that massively, it can act very, very swiftly. And here it is, the political will is clearly there. The public support is obviously raising. We've heard about Spain and Slovakia. Even in 2019, there was a poll where people were asked, I think the European Commission made that poll, whether they are supporting some kind of European forces or defense, and they were very much like in 80% pro this kind of activities of having a common European army or European defense forces. To me, from my point of view, as an analyst and as a journalist, it sometimes seems that it's kind of laying on the ground, and there's no one to really pick up that topic and push it forward. And where here, if there was any kind of momentum to do it, to pick it up and to really go forward, definitely now, and whoever's going to do it, and it's going to France, Germany, or European, Eastern European countries that we see now, this is going to create another major development, and it may not end up bad for Europe.
Thank you so much. Let's here.
Yeah, just quickly about public opinion and the importance of symbols. I mentioned Article 42.2 and the concept of the European common defense. And I think we also talked about the importance of sending a strong signal through the publication of the strategic compass. I think these symbols are very important vis-a-vis Russia and also vis-a-vis our public opinion, showing that we are able to take bold move in reaction to the crisis. And I completely agree, if we're not ambitious and audacious in this circumstances, it means that we'll never be. So this is also an obligation that we have.
Thank you so much, General. I'm glad that you asked, and probably I'll sharpen the question a bit further for you. How worried you are that you will be attacked, be it by some random missile or any situation on the other side, and whether there is some direct risk that Europe will be involved also in Ukraine. I mean, by
Well, I will give you the same answer as I had given just before the outbreak of war. I said, I cannot exclude it. So we cannot exclude it. It may end up this way. I would not like to scare anyone, but simply we see what is happening on the field and we see the rhetoric. However, I think everybody in the European Union has seen that in face of such a threat as we see an attack as we see in Ukraine, none of us, including France, can, well, it can withstand the threat, but at what cost? So what we have to do is stick together as we did, and we can very quickly come together, stick together, present a common viewpoint. We should not restrain ourselves from, technical military assistance to Ukraine. It is also sanctioned by UN Charter. They are in self-defense mode. We are supporting the country because Russia, as a permanent member of Security Council, objects and blocks all other solutions, but Article 42 normally would call for common action of international community to preserve the existence of Ukraine. So if Russia would like to attack us, eventually they would do it anyway, but we should not, I don't see that we will go directly militarily to Ukraine, although at some point I can see that this provision of UN, although without Security Council, unfortunately, that's not going to happen. If the mass killing, a mass attack on the civilian infrastructure, the civilian population continues, probably we would not go to fight the Russians' aggression, but might end up in a situation that we will have to position ourselves inside Ukraine just to preserve at least the humanitarian corridors. But that's not yet on the table. At the moment, it's enough for us to be bold and resolved and stick together. Otherwise, Russia will take this opportunity and will try to do something. Because that's the whole time what they do, try to separate us, to scare us, to disview us, to oppose. We should not provoke, we should not go directly challenging the Russians, but on the other hand, we should stay behind Ukraine.
Thank you so much, General. That was the perfect wrap-up of the conversation. Unfortunately, we have to finish with this discussion, so I would like to thank first and foremost all the speakers, including the French participants who made the trip from Paris specifically to join us for the conversation. Once again, thank you very much for the French Embassy and the French Institute in Slovakia for all the supports in putting together this event, and of course to all the participants who are here with us today, physically, but also on Zoom. Thank you so much. We'll be doing a wrap-up summary of the conversation, which you all will receive, but we do hope to continue this conversation also with all of you in other settings. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.